Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to also start by thanking the organizers for a wonderful conference. I think the highlight of the conference was to watch the young scholars and listen to their presentations. So mine is going to be very disappointing compared to what they did. I'm not going to present my own research, although I have done research on Turkish economy. So let's try this. Okay, is this better? So I have done research on the Turkish economy, but most of my recent research is really not so much about the Turkish economy, but I'm, as many of you are probably, curious about the Turkish economy, both in the long run and in the short run. So I thought I will organize the data with the view of an economist and present you some of the things. I had done something similar to this in the past, and I had titled it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, if you guys remember that movie. So there are parts of what I'm going to present that's good, there are parts of what I'm going to present that's bad, and that's parts of what I'm going to present that's kind of ugly. So with that, let me start with the good part. So this is GDP level in Turkey in 2015 with comparison to its European partners. So you would see that in this graph, Turkey ranks quite highly, and this gets mentioned by many politicians about the size of the Turkish economy. It's true, we do have a high GDP among many of the European countries. But it turns out that one of the reasons GDP can be high is due to the size of the country. So the size of the population and size of the labor force matters very much for the size of GDP. So while this is good, the next graph, I would say, is kind of bad. So what I'm graphing here is GDP per capita. So now I have taken the gross national product, which is the value of all the goods and services produced in a particular year, and divided it by the number of people. And I'm showing you the ranking of the Turkish economy with the same countries that I showed you before. It's not good. So that's the bad part. We're still not rich enough compared to our European partners. So then I thought, well, how about long run? You know, instead of looking at just 2015, I wanted to see how Turkish economy changed over time. Now, this is a typical graph. This is actually GDP per capita now, because it turns out that economists mostly worry about GDP per capita. It tells you the living standards of the people in the country, like an average person in that country. Of course, it misses the distribution. You know, maybe some people are very rich, some people are very poor. It misses that, obviously. But still, it's a better measure than GDP alone when you're trying to understand the living standards of people in a country. Anyway, that's why I'm graphing GDP per capita now. So the data starts from 1950. I don't know if you can all see it, and it goes until 2015. And this is kind of a typical graph when people graph GDP per capita. You know, it goes up. It doesn't tell you too much. It doesn't tell you enough, probably, as a comparison. You see ups and downs. You know, you can kind of look at the slope of that, and it will tell you the growth rate of GDP per capita. But I'm going to show it to you in a slightly different way. First, I'm going to show it to you with two comparison countries. So here what I have graphed is Spain is the red line and Greece is the yellow line. I have used them as a comparison group in the past because in 1950 we started in similar levels. So we had similar characteristics also in 1950s, even today we do. So I thought maybe a good way to understand how Turkey performed is to look at its performance relative to what we might call the peer countries. And I chose these two. I will show you other graphs with many other countries because your choice of a comparison country becomes important in the story that you're trying to tell. But what I want to do here with this data is to kind of see if one of the predictions of economic theory has come true or not for the Turkish economy. So one of these predictions, it comes from something called the solo growth model, is that poor countries should converge faster or should converge to the frontier countries. So they should grow faster so that they can converge to frontier countries. So similar to what Milton Friedman had said, if the governments were actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is provide for security, provide for good institutions, and provide for good economic conditions for their countries, they should, just through capital accumulation, they should grow and they should converge. So what I'm going to graph now is this GDP relative to the UK. So actually, per capita GDP in a given country divided by per capita GDP in UK, and see if these countries have converged. That's the graph I want to show you. So unfortunately, I don't see the second line there, but let me do Greece, that is quite visible. So what this graph says is that in 1950s, Greece started at 30% of the UK levels. So per capita GDP in Greece was 30% of UK in 1950. Then between 1950 and 1970, they grew up to 70% of the GDP per capita of UK. So they converged. There was very fast convergence. And then they stagnated. And of course, this Great Recession, they did very poorly compared to the UK. The very invisible line up there, I don't know why the colors changed in this computer, is Spain. So Spain shows a very similar pattern to the yellow line until the 70s and 80s. It converges at the same rate to the UK levels. And then it stagnates, and it again does poorly in the recession. This is Turkey. When I graphed this line for the first time, I was very, very depressed. This actually is my lifetime. I was born in 1959, so this is my lifetime. And I suspect many of you here. Which meant that in Turkey, relative to the UK, we stagnated all this time. So even though when you look at the first graph, which was this, and even though many economists have said that Turkey had glorious growth in early years of the Turkish economy, say between 1950 and 1970, it ain't true. Yes, it was high growth, but it was so much lower than its peer countries. It did not converge at all to the frontier country. So I totally dismiss the idea that Turkey did well early on. In fact, Turkey didn't do well overall. It is hard not to notice the last several years of higher slope of this convergence. This is, remember, divided by the UK levels. So UK went through the Great Recession. So UK did kind of poorly. In fact, too bad with these colors. But in any case, this is saying that Turkey did relatively better with relative to UK, and much better than Spain and Greece, obviously, in this time period. We'll come back to this recent period again and compare with many other countries. But so far, the story I got from this graph was that there was no convergence. Things did not really work as well, and I was depressed. And you look at, some countries where there's high convergence, and then there are some other countries like Argentina, for example, starts high and goes down. So they do the opposite of convergence. So it could have been worse. It wasn't worse, but it actually wasn't great either. So I call this the ugly. Okay. Now, this is another graph that made me very, very jealous. So as I was telling you, it depends on who you're comparing yourself with. Here, on top of, so I had Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, and South Korea. And what you see with South Korea, and these are GDP per capitas, is a giant leap forward, basically. They have converged. So whatever they did, it worked well. That's the good for them. So relative to, say, South Korea, we did very badly. As I said, it kind of depends on who you're comparing yourself with. And there's never a consensus to who we are supposed to be comparing ourselves with. I look at different papers written by different economists about Turkey. Some tell a very bad story, some tell a very good story, because it always depends on who they're comparing themselves with. So that's why here I wanted to give you a larger comparison set. So what you have in yellow is the BRICS countries. So that's Brazil, Russia, India, and China. What you see in red are called missed countries. This was the second set of high potential growth countries that Goldman Sachs had come up with after the BRICS. That was before 2007. I don't think they refer to us among the missed countries anymore. But I have that group. And then I have UK, Spain, and the US, just again as a comparison group. So according to economic theory, rich, developed countries should not grow very fast. Nobody expects the US to grow at 9%. That's not going to happen. The US is a rich, mature country. It's not going to grow at 9%. But the poor, younger countries should grow faster so that they converge, they come closer to the US or UK levels. So in that list, Turkey is okay. Not bad, not good, not stellar. It's fine. So in terms of, this is also GDP per capita, by the way. I notice I don't have the vertical axes. Well, it's the growth rate of GDP per capita. So how to understand this growth? As Karen was saying, what is making these countries grow? Are they growing because of labor, because of capital, or because of productivity? So I do have an equation here. This is the equation for gross national product. And it gets produced by using technology, capital, and labor. So it becomes really easy in some senses to analyze growth experiences of different countries. Just look at these things. Are they growing because they've been increasing their labor force, or the quality of their labor force, which is human capital? Are they growing because they're just building capital or buying more capital, so it's the capital stock? Or is it productivity? Now, economic theory also tells us that in the long run, the good way of growing is by technology, by productivity. So eventually, what makes countries different, or what makes long-run growth possible, is to be growing through technological change, through innovation, and that's the best long-run scenario for economic growth. But in the short run, when you're a poor country, a lot of your growth might come from capital accumulation. So I wanted to compare these countries with respect to these measures. So I'm going to do that relative to the US, and I'm going to do with respect to GDP per capita. So I'm going to show you, for example, labor productivity. So this is the same measure as GDP per capita. So in terms of labor productivity, you see Turkey does, so it's at 40% of the US levels. So if this number was 1, it would mean that that country is at 100% of the US level. So with 0.4 for Turkey, we are saying that Turkish labor productivity is about 40% of the US labor productivity. That's what it's showing us. So it's worse than Korea, it's better than Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Great Britain, and Spain, of course, do better, as well as Greece in this graph. So we are starting to get a sense of where we lack and where we would be actually, where we would need to catch up. So what is causing the low labor productivity? This is now tangible capital per worker. So this is literally the machines that workers are using. So how many machines do you have per worker? If this is a computer-related industry, let's say, how many computers, or is there a computer per worker? That's what it's measuring. So the higher the capital stock, the more productive you expect your labor force to be. Also, infrastructure shows up here. Your bridges, your roads show up here. I was very surprised, actually, to see that Turkey is doing worse in this category. So Turkish tangible capital per worker is about 20% of the US. So that kind of tells me that Turkey still has a lot of room for growth by just making its capital stock better. So by equipping its labor force with more capital, which was something I actually did not expect, especially after the last 10 years of incredible amount of construction and infrastructure building. I was expecting this number to be higher, but it is lower. This was another surprise. This is now human capital. This is a very reliable measure. This is average years of schooling that is put together by two economists, Barrow and Lee, that everybody uses in this profession. So this is human capital per worker compared to the US again. And Turkey shows up at 60% of the US levels. This seemed higher to me than what I was expecting, to tell you the truth. So I sent emails to all my colleagues in Turkey saying, is this number correct? They assured me that this number is correct. Then I thought, I need to look more into this human capital story because as I mentioned, productivity is very important, but equally important is human capital. So if we were not improving in human capital, that would have been a very bad sign. It would have gone into the good, the bad, and the ugly. It would have gone into the ugly category. It's not going there yet. In terms of that, we are improving, it seems. Now, of course, many other countries, like look at Korea. Korea, human capital per worker is at the same level as the US. And many of us know how much Korea did in terms of education. So that didn't come to me as a surprise. Many other countries are not too bad either. But I wanted to see how this has been changing over time. And here I got other data. So this is now comparing 2010 to 2000, average years of schooling relative to the US again in the total population. And I did it by age because the previous graph was a combination of all the ages. So when I had these discussions at USC with my colleagues, they said, well, average years of schooling for the entire population doesn't matter. Look at the young people. What's happening to the young people? So that's why I created this graph, and I look at the young people. Young people are not doing that badly over time. So this is 15 to 20-year-olds. This is 20 to 25-year-olds. So the red one is 2010. The blue one is 2000. So if you look at this one, for example, average years of schooling for the 15 to 20-year-olds has gone up from 60% to 80% of the US levels. So again, this is okay category so far. This is I wasn't sure I would be getting this. I was surprised, but I graphed both the average years of schooling for the total population and for the female population because I wasn't sure if I would be seeing the same improvements in the female population, and in fact, we do see the same improvements in the female population. So those are good news. I don't think we should dismiss them. But I wanted to do more digging into this education part because, as I said, human capital is very important. So I found a paper that Daron and Murat Uçer had written up, a very, very good paper, and they report, and I'm going to show their graphs actually in here. So they report quality of education. Oh, because that was another question that came up. Okay, years of schooling might be going up, but how about quality of education? Maybe we're not educating them properly. So how do you measure that? It turns out that there's an international measure. It's called this Program for International Student Assessment, PISA score, that all the OECD countries their students take. So here's a graph. Oh, sorry, more on this PISA because some of my colleagues said, well, maybe this is all memorization. We are good at memorizing perhaps. But it turns out that particular exam is not testing memorization. They go into great lengths, actually, in trying to dismiss the view that it is memorization. And they try to explain it's critical thinking. This is the way we are designing this test. And this is an explanation of, what the website for this test says. So 5 minutes, excellent. In Turkey, you see a big improvement. So these graphs are showing the gap between OECD and Turkey in these test scores. So the red ones, this light blue one is 2012. There is a huge decline in the gap between Turkey and OECD countries in this measure. So quality of education, I'm putting it in the good category. The distribution of resources into different parts of Turkey. So this is Geographical distribution of per capita government investment expenditures. This is 2001. Red means high expenditures in that region. That was 2001. This is 2011. I'm putting that in the good category as well. More money is being spent in areas that didn't have these resources before. So I'm going to skip to the bad because I have very little time left. So I'm going to show you what lies beyond. So there is something called the Global Competitiveness Report that comes out every year. And they rank countries in terms of their competitiveness. And they look at a bunch of different categories. So in a list of 140 countries, Turkey ranks number 51. So Switzerland is number 1. Guinea is number 140. And we are 51, which is not bad, maybe. But we used to be 45 a year before. So we went down in rankings from 45 to 51st country. And it turns out that the thing that went badly, which I'm going to call ugly, is the ranking of institutions. So the ranking of institutions, Turkey went to the 75th level. That level is similar to Panama, Swaziland, Armenia, and Philippines. So what is in institutions? These are the things in institutions. Judicial independence, favoritism in decisions of government officials, efficiency of the legal framework, business cost of terrorism, reliability of police services, and even ethical behavior of firms. That's the ugly. Those are very, very bad rankings among the 140 countries that we have. And I worry that they could affect the economy very poorly into the future. So I would call this the ugly. Some other problems are low saving rates, high inflation, and missing the targets, which is what has been happening in the last several years. Also, the quality of education, interestingly, ranks kind of poorly in here, which is, I need to understand it a little better, because given all the information about education I gave before, I wasn't expecting that either. But what I would conclude with is that when I look at this data, I see a mixed story of economic growth. It's sometimes good, sometimes bad. I do see improvements in human capital that are important. There is still room for economic growth through capital accumulation, which was surprising to me. There is a slowdown of economic growth since 2001. And there is a serious deterioration of institutions, according to this competitiveness index, that will impact the economy, surely, including one of the institutions that's been very important in Turkey, which is the independence of the central bank. And there is going to be a new governor of central bank. It will be by the end of, by summer, I think we will know. And those are going to be very important for the future of economic growth in Turkey. That I will end.